Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, Identity and Influence. I'm sitting here with the one and only Dr. Lem Usita. Dr.
Yes,
Delam, what's
sir.
up?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me back on the show, man. Looking forward to talking through these ideas.
Yeah, we are talking about one of your articles today, leadership lesson number 10, which you titled Management Encourages Compliance. I love that.
Mhm.
And so let's just jump right into it. Well, why is it so important to differentiate between management and leadership in today's organizational dynamics?
Yeah, I think so many people confuse the two and will often talk about leadership when they're actually talking about management and vice versa. And so I think clarity on the difference between management and leadership helps with roles. It helps with what it is that we need to do practically in leadership and whether we're talking about leadership or management. But yeah, I think having a clarity on these two different ideas really helps you in your leadership.
Let's talk about the clarity of those two then. Can you give us an overview of the key differences between management and leadership?
Yeah, the quick version is that management encourages compliance. And so management is trying to keep things rolling, whereas leadership encourages creativity and change. Management is about maintaining the status quo, and leadership is about challenging the status quo. One is keeping things the same, and the other one is changing things, right? So management is about keeping things the same, and leadership is about change. Management tends to focus on process. And in my opinion, leadership tends to focus on people. And I mean, that's just kind of the quick version of it. There's a lot of writing. So if you just do a Google search for management versus leadership, a lot of stuff will come.
You mentioned that management focuses on compliance. So,
Yeah.
how does this help organizations maintain stability?
Okay. So when I'm talking about management, I'm not saying that it's bad. Now, for many years, I used to pit the two against each other, and just talk about how much leadership is better. But management is not necessarily a bad thing and it's necessary. But management is mostly about systems and efficiency. Management is about like making widgets and being able to pump out more widgets. And we definitely need managers, 100%. But the problem is when you ask a manager to lead, um, and they may not necessarily be able to do that. Managers can typically keep the process going, and leaders, again, are about change and making things better and making things more efficient.
So, when we talk about the roles of systems, policies, procedures, compliance within an organization, can you explain how all those work together?
Yeah, so when you have systems, policies, and procedures, those provide the guardrails for employees to follow, right? To keep the system going. And compliance is key to keep systems running. The guardrails, like the policies and procedures, help the employees stay within, the system. And again, it keeps it running. Compliance in many situations is a wonderful thing. Like, my In and Out, like when I think about compliance in the system, In and Out has a system of pumping out cheeseburgers and they have a very simple menu. There's, unless you know the secret menu, they pretty much don't deviate from that menu, right? And I mean, if you know the secret menu, you can make certain changes to your thing, but for the most part, like there's somebody making fries and there's somebody cutting potatoes and there's somebody putting the burgers together, and like it's just, a line of people doing their job, and they got a system that works. And typically when you go in and out, especially during lunch, like the lines are super long, and it doesn't really take super long to get, well, sometimes it might, depending on how long the lines are, but for the most part, the system is efficient and it runs that restaurant, and it's a simple menu and it's a simple system, but it's a proven system, and you don't really change or deviate too much from that system. Another area in my life where I really like compliance is, airline pilots, right? They have certain guidelines and they have certain things that they have to do in order to fly their plane. They got lots of system checks that they have to do before they even fire the thing up. And, I don't really want my pilot to exercise like some liberties and freedoms and think outside of the guardrails, I kind of want to get to my destination safely. So compliance, systems, policies, procedures, they actually make the organization run. and they are good, but that's for a manager to manage. Leaders, I think, do something a little bit differently, and just knowing the difference really helps.
Yeah, I think that's a great example with In-N-Out, because you know what you're going to get, even if it's going to be a longer line,
Yeah.
it's still worth it because the
It'll be,
system is,
yeah,
it's, we want to get things done the way that they're supposed to be. And that's a great
hmm
example. And
yeah,
so when we're monitoring accountability tools, as In-N-Out and other establishments that are very successful do, and so we have KPIs, we have audits that contribute to the culture of compliance. How does all that work?
So when you monitor your KPIs and your audits, you're basically measuring and evaluating the system. And if your employees are within the guardrails of policies and procedures, then you can catch inefficiencies. You can catch where things aren't necessarily working, or whether employees aren't necessarily working or not. Um, and like, monitoring and keeping folks accountable keeps the system running.
So, what role does training and development play? Because if we want to ensure that employees are adhering to the organizational goals, how do we make that work?
Yeah, training is key to keep the system going, so that employees and the team uh, knows where we're headed, and knows how to keep the system running. Communication about the organizational goals is also pretty key. Being able to communicate a clear and compelling vision really keeps people on track. So it keeps people within the guardrails, but it keeps people moving forward as well. And so I think that training is key. Yeah, to keep the system going.
So, if we're keeping the system going, then it would seem to me that we would be at risk of putting too much focus on compliance, which in some cases could stifle creativity. So, how can
Right.
organizations avoid this?
Yeah, as I think through that question, I think it depends on the industry and even departments within certain organizations. First of all, compliance with the law and policy and procedures are always a good thing, especially compliance with the law. Let's never break the law in our organizations. I don't necessarily want my pilot or In-N-Out to get super creative with their burger, because I have expectations of I have expectations of getting to my destination. I have expectations of what my double double is going to look like. But I think the creativity and leadership can come in, well, they come in different ways, right? Like, again, compliance definitely stifles creativity. Like, compliance is about keeping things going and about keeping things the same. It's about status quo. Now, creativity in how we run those systems, like, there's some good examples of that, but typically managers aren't hired to be creative. Leaders are the ones doing that work. Managers are kind of there to, maintain status quo. And so, yeah, you can focus too much on compliance and it'll keep you stuck. But I think, you know, depending on the industry or depending on the department, and that's why clarity on these two concepts of management and leadership is pretty important. Like, where is it in your organization that you need management? And then where is it in your organization that you need leadership? Again, like, understanding the difference helps you to be a better leader. Because if you're leading and you need to be doing some managing, then you're actually confusing people and you're actually not a good leader, because you need to help them in management, not leadership.
I love how you talk about management and leadership not being mutually exclusive, but that you need
Right.
both.
We need
And that's
both.
important. So let's talk about leadership encouraging the creativity and change that all businesses, all cultures need. So
Yeah.
leadership seems to thrive on vision, inspiration. So
Inspiration. Yeah.
how does that structured approach of management differ from leadership, and how can we make sure that we're driving in the right direction when talking about leadership needing it to thrive for our organizations?
We need both leadership and management, but in the right place. So vision and inspiration can definitely strengthen a structured approach. Management focuses on the status quo. Management focuses on the systems. and leaders kind of come along to kind of break the system in order to be more efficient or to become better. The example that comes to mind is Chick-fil-A and how, they built a little drive-through window area, but Chick-fil-A, like those lines were really, really long and they wanted to become more efficient. They wanted to become better. So a leader came along and they took the structure and they took the system, and the leader came along and developed, well, how can we make this system run more efficiently, better, and faster? So they created two lines. And not only did they create two lines, they had folks at different spots, taking orders way up front, like way far from the drive-in window. And then they had somebody to either take payment or check. At this point, they even take payment like at the order. Then they have somebody check to make sure that all the cars line up in the right order. And then when you get to the window, they even have people outside like handing stuff out. Like that was the system worked fine without those people out there. But Chick-fil-A went a step further and a leader came along to make that system better. And so that's kind of the example that comes to mind of how managers maintain the status quo and how leaders can kind of break that system and make it more efficient and better.
So the people that work there who are within that system, within that structure, they see the leaders doing this. So how does an inspiring or compelling vision help employees then to think creatively and innovate themselves? Like, can that be within that structure?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the organization and depends on your role in the organization. But I think a compelling vision can help an employee love what they do. It also creates an environment for an employee to share their ideas so that they can make things better. But the feedback loop has to exist in the organization in order for that. I think a good leader can create an environment where anyone on the team, no matter what level, can speak into the process. I think the example that stands out to me is the example of Richard Montañez. He was a janitor at the Frito-Lay's in Rancho Cucamonga. And I've heard him share the story at the Willow Creek Leadership Conference, and he was a janitor at the Frito-Lay's. And, he claims that he came up with this invention of Flaming Hot Cheetos, and as a janitor, he was able to go get in front of the CEO and get in front of the Frito-Lay like higher ups and was able to share his idea. And I mean, it kind of exploded and took off. And he's written a ton of books, and there's a movie that's going to come out about this. Now, I did read a LA Times article that says that it's not true, but let's not let the truth ever. Let's not let the truth ever get in the way of a great story. And so he shared that story, and
Yeah.
no one's really corrected him. And he's written a ton of books, and he gets lots of speaking gigs talking about how he created Flaming Hot Cheetos. But the principle is, that this janitor had this idea and they wanted to tap into a market, right? And it did so by creating Flaming Hot Cheetos. And now, like when you look at their product lineup, there's Flaming Hot, all kinds of things,
Absolutely.
because somebody had this idea, someone low level guy had this idea, brought it up, and now, happens. But I think you need environment or a culture where you can create that kind of feedback. And not every organization has that.
So you mentioned creating a safe environment for employees to voice those ideas, which
Yeah.
that's incredible. So why is psychological safety so important for fostering creativity in an organization?
Yeah. This is a great question. This is something that I didn't really understand when I was younger. And as a young leader, I'd bring up all kinds of great new ideas, right? But a new idea on someone's great system that they built is always a threat to the system and a threat to the person that created that
Right.
system. And so when you're challenging a system, you're challenging not just the system, but the person that put it together. Now, if that person is secure in who they are, then they'll welcome that challenge. But just understand that when you are challenging system, you're challenging somebody's ego and somebody's feelings at the end of the day. But in an environment where you can voice your ideas, is always going to be a threat for someone if they're not secure, right? It takes a secure leader to create an environment where you're able to hear other people's opinions. I think of that level 5 leader, that level 5 leader is really about the health and well-being of the organization. They're secure enough in their leadership and they care about the vision of the organization that they're open to those challenges and they're open to those changes. Whereas an insecure leader is going to be challenged by, a better idea. And so I think that's how it plays out. Like, if it's not safe, if it's not safe to share those ideas, then, you're never going to have that culture.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies need to get better at this. And so, can you
Mhm.
share an example that demonstrates how leadership encourages creativity?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. At Google, they have what they call 20% time, right? Where they're allowed to play in the sandpit. So 80% of their
Yeah.
time, they have to do their job. And then 20% of the time, they can work on a pet project or on something else. And there are so many products that came out of that 20% time. Gmail is a product that many of us use that came out of someone's 20% time. Apple believes in the power of experts, not managers. And the belief at Apple is that it's easier to train an expert to manage people and it's much harder to train managers to be experts in something. So Apple tends to hire experts, and then trains them to be managers as opposed to the other way around because, you know, experts can be managers, but managers can't always be leaders. Starbucks has, if you look at the app, well, first of all, they have an app, right? And Starbucks has created all kinds of innovation, like with My Starbucks. It's an open conversation with their customers, and it's an open feedback loop with their customers. The pumpkin spice latte came out of having conversations with their customers, and so in that system, a customer can say, "Hey, make this or create this," and Starbucks listens to their customers. And so a culture of innovation is an environment in which creativity and creative problem solving are encouraged throughout the organization. It's a setting that fosters collaboration and encourages employees and customers to think outside of the box when it comes to generating new ideas or solving existing problems. And again, a very secure and mature leader needs to create that. Like it just doesn't happen.
Leaders are often associated with embracing change. So, how can they help their teams adapt to change effectively as well?
So again, I think there's a direct correlation between leaders being able to embrace change and how secure they are in their personhood and in their leadership. And that's why in these conversations, we keep coming back to get a mentor, get some coaching, be clear on your values, be clear on who you are as a person and as a leader. But the thing that comes to mind is, does the culture at your organization allow for change, right? We can help our teams adapt to change, but if the culture of the organization doesn't allow that, then, it just doesn't happen. I know some leaders that really need to take credit for everyone's work. That's just, I've
Yeah.
seen it. And when in that kind of situation, like if you don't care that the leader does that, then you can make change. In fact, like I remember one time I had this boss, and if you have a better understanding of the boss, then you can kind of make change happen. And I was instructed, or I was coached in dealing with my boss. Like I always brought 3 ideas, the one idea that I really wanted him to do, and then 2 horrible ideas that I knew he would say no to. But it gave him the ability to choose one of 3 options. You know what I mean? I was still
Right.
able to make change and I was still able to get what I wanted done, but you kind of had to communicate it and do it in a way that fits the culture. You can lead them as much, and you can only lead people to what you've experienced yourself. And if you're able to experience that when you're younger or work for people that are amazing leaders, then you're able to see what you can do. I mean, it's the law of the leadership lid, right? Like you can only like inspire your team as much as you've experienced yourself. So that's how I'd answer that question.
One of my favorite books, and I read this years ago, and I still read it, and I still have my clients read it if they are not the boss, is called Leading Up by
Hmm.
Michael Useem.
Yeah.
And what you just said, it's an art.
Yeah.
It's an art to lead up, to lead your boss,
Yeah.
essentially.
Right.
And
Right.
if you want to get things done in the best interest of both the boss and of the company, you have to learn how to do that. if you want to make change where you're at in your company, you
Mhm.
need to learn how to lead up. And it all comes back to how to win friends and influence people. How do I connect with people, especially those who are above us? For our listeners, go out there, get Michael Useem's book. It's wonderful. It'll be life-changing in the way that you help to lead up to your boss.
Yeah.
Let's talk about balancing management and leadership together. You mentioned the need to balance structure and flexibility. Well, how can organizations achieve this without tipping too far in one direction or the other?
Yeah, in my experience, organizations definitely need both, but based on, again, the growth cycle of the organization. And when you tip too far in too much structure or too much flexibility, then it leads to the organization dying. So understanding where the organization is or the movement of the organization cycle, I think is the differentiator. So I don't think it's about structure or flexibility, but more about where the organization is in its development cycle.
How can organizations then encourage managers to adopt leadership qualities and leaders to embrace management skills? Can they do both?
Right. So knowing what area needs leadership and what area needs managers is the differentiator. So that's part of the reason why we're even talking about knowing the difference. Clarity on both of those help you to understand where you need leadership and management. And yes, some people can do both. I think it's very rare for one person to be able to do both really, really well. And so when I talk about this organizational cycle, there's 5 stages of an organization. Stage 1 is startup. There's so much excitement, like people are excited about what it is that they're doing. And then stage 2 is growth. You know, they turn their excitement into some growth, like these products are taking off, these services are taking off. And then there's growth. When there is that much growth, right? The systems can't keep up with that growth because it's just excitement. And so then it plateaus. And once you hit like a level of growth, you go into stage 3 where it's maturity. And then you need to develop systems, right? And then you're moving along and you develop systems. The systems are working. But when you're focusing on systems, then growth isn't the focus, right? And so what you need is a new leader to take you to the next level and a new visionary to take you to the next level. And then you go back into a leader that can, level you up. But then like when you level up, it's going to get too crazy and you're going to sell too many products. And then you're going to need to develop again newer systems in order to manage that growth. So the organization is constantly growing. Okay. Needing a manager to level out, building systems, needing a leader to grow, and then needing another manager. And then eventually in stage 4, you're either going to decline and then you're either going to renew and then level up again, or you're going to just die as an organization. And so understanding where you are in that leadership, like in that organizational growth cycle, really kind of helps you to understand what it is that you're doing. And even in an organization, understanding like if it's getting too crazy, you're going to need a manager to come in and build systems, right? But once you build the systems and everything gets ready, then you're going to then need growth, which is then a leadership role. One thing that we do is when you have like a visionary lead, it gets too crazy. And then what organizations do or what boards do is the pendulum swings and they're like, oh, this is too crazy. Let's hire a manager to kind of settle things down. And they hire a manager and then they get bored of that because there's no change and there's nothing new and exciting. And so then they bring back another leader that's visionary to like get them up to the next level. I mean, I'm really oversimplifying like what happens, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what happens in organizations. And so I think knowing where you are in that growth cycle of the organization helps you to understand like this is the kind of leaders that we need, this is the kind of leadership that we need.
A lot of times the people who are in charge don't know what they're doing. They bring in all these people that are supposedly experts, but it's definitely not the way that Apple does it.
Right.
Because I think that there needs to be a better understanding of what the culture is. And I don't think people do culture very well, which actually leads me to my next question, which is how do you cultivate a culture of experimentation that balances compliance with creativity? Because everybody's always talking about compliance. Nobody ever talks about creativity. And then all of a sudden you get in there and then they say, why aren't you being creative enough?
Right.
Well, because I'm doing what you told me to.
Yeah.
So how do we balance those?
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of mentioned a couple of those ideas. You definitely need a secure leader in order to create that kind of environment and that kind of culture. And then, like you just mentioned, like most leaders just don't really know how to do that because they're not listening to their employees. There isn't a feedback loop where those that are doing the work, those are on the front lines, they're not able to communicate up. I mean, you might be able to do it with a strategic plan and you definitely can do it within teams, but there needs to be a leader that can kind of create that in order to make that happen. You know, when we talk about this, I think about the show Undercover Boss. You know that show
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
where a CEO will work the line, will work the front counter. They will work on the factory line. You know, they will do like a low level job in order to gain insight about the company, insight about systems. And then sometimes they end up hiring this employee to help them with creativity and run better systems. When organizations get too big, like, you know, the need for hearing from employees and those on the front lines are a little bit more important. But yeah, man, watch any of those shows and you can kind of see all of these things at work.
What does balancing structure and flexibility look like? How can an organization do this? How can they be practical about balancing the structures that you're talking about?
Yeah, when I think through this question, I don't know if it's balancing because I think what the question presupposes is that one person can do both. And like we just mentioned earlier, like it's really hard for to find a person that can actually do both. Because if you're a true leader, you're not going to want to manage. Like, let's be honest. You know what I mean? And I know lots of managers that want to lead that can't because they're just managers. And so I don't know that it's about finding a balance as much as it is finding the right people on the team in the right places. And that's why Jim Collins wrote about the right people in the right seats on the bus. And so it's being able to hire managers and leaders. Well, first of all, it's being able to know the difference between what a manager does and what a leader does. And then being able to hire managers and leaders and then putting them in their place. You know, don't put a manager in a management role, put a leader in a leadership role. And interestingly enough, if you do some coaching with Dr. Morales here, like you can take the DISC assessment, and the DISC assessment really helps you to gain clarity on whether you're fit for management or you're fit for leadership. Like that's what that tool does at the end of the day. And then it gives you nuance as well, like are you leading people? Are you leading a process? Are you managing details or are you managing people? I mean, it gives you so much nuance into being a better manager and being a better leader. But at the end of the day, I don't know that it's about balancing structure and flexibility as much as it is, well, balancing the team, right? So balance the team and have managers in the right place, have leaders in the right place.
So let's talk about implementing training programs that can develop both leadership and management skills. Where do these fit into the culture? And how do you think that companies can implement these to their benefit?
The thing that comes to mind first is, are you a small organization or a larger organization? I think these days organizations are required to have these trainings. I mean, it's a value add if your organizations bring leadership and development training programs, and then you can also hire the rising tide, you know, leadership consulting group to like just kind of do your leadership development for you. But organizations typically have leadership development training programs, you know, to kind of help them develop their managers and their leaders. I think if you're listening to this podcast, especially this episode, you're already kind of on track to do that. You know, organizations, if and any organization worth their salt, they're kind of already doing this kind of training.
So for companies that want to implement something, but they don't have anything, so it might be something new, can you elaborate on the idea of pilot programs or initiatives for encouraging innovations, like on a smaller scale?
Can we cut this question out? Oh,
Yeah,
Mark,
sure. Yep, no problem.
I don't have a good response to this unless you do. I mean,
Uh,
I saw Adobe's Kickbox, but I don't know anything about it.
okay. Yeah, no, it's okay.
Just being honest.
No, that's all right. I just, all right, here we go.
But I marked it.
Yeah, that's good. There's two of them. Okay, here we go. So let's wrap this all up. So how can leaders and managers work together to ensure compliance and creativity coexist in the organization?
Well, everyone needs to get clear on the difference between a manager and leader. Everyone needs to get clarity on what compliance is and creativity within the culture of the organization. Everyone needs to know their role. I think the DISC assessment really helps. I think the mentoring and coaching really helps. I think clarity on your values and how they align with the vision really helps. So, so yeah, compliance and creativity can coexist in an organization as long as they're in the right place.
You mentioned the DISC assessment. I love it. You know that we're all about that at Rising Tide.
Mm-hmm.
What's one other key takeaway from our discussion today on management and leadership that you would say, audience, you need to know this, you need to remember this?
There is value in management. I think there is tremendous value in leadership. And like I said, for the longest time, I used to think that one was better than the other, right? And I wanted to be a leader. I tend to be a D, well, I tend to score DI on my DISC assessment. Obviously, I'm going to lean that way and not really care about the details. Both are important. Both are important, and organizations need both managers and leaders in order to make it run. And you're a lot more effective when you know your role and you got clarity on management and leadership. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah. Well, hey, Dr. Lim, thanks so much for having
Yes,
this
sir.
conversation today. Man, these leadership lessons are very helpful for our audience. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss any of the exciting things that we have coming down the pipe. And we will see you next time. Thanks a lot, brother.
Thank you.